Can I ask for a quick bracha before we go?
Bavakasha, let's do it right now. Birkat Kohanim was only 2 weeks ago in the Parashah. Vayidaber Adonai Moshe le'medaber lahanom v'le'me k'risvorchus m'neisol l'mer lahem. Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. Yor Adonai panav alecha v'yichuneka. Yisad Adonai panav alecha v'yisemcha shalom. Nisam Shmi Amnei Yisrael v'ani avorchem. After all the good brachas that you need and much more. B'toiv ha'nira v'ha'niglam. Open and revealed goodness.
Good work.
Good work.
But don't forget to send me the recording. I'll catch it up later, yeah?
With Hashem's help. Look after yourself, Hashem.
Shlach, כל טוב.
כל טוב. Morning, Neville.
Hi there, how are you?
Baruch Hashem, welcome aboard.
Yeah, lovely. Looking forward.
We're
Beautiful
not praying
day.
that you get injured more often, but I hope you get better soon.
I'm going swimming next at 11 o'clock because it's always good for soft tissue damage, ligaments, to swim, and it just makes it better very, very quickly because no impact.
Well, you don't rest. It's good. You should never rest.
No, it's next. It's good. No, it's all good.
Baruch Hashem, yeah.
I'm doing Korach at Shul in a few weeks. That's my bar mitzvah, etc. Korach, I've done it with you before.
Correct. Very good.
So
you revised a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't got the audio. I thought I had it, but you know, you read it 3 times, you know it. It's.
You get compliments from the rabbi, I'm sure.
I'll get a nod, and I know I'll get a nod. 1, 2 nods, and you're really doing well. 3 nods, and you're ecstatic.
You come to the shrubberies, and everybody nods for you.
Ah, very good. I've been to Singers Hill because we had my brother's 50th birthday party. We stayed in a local hotel, and that was the nearest shul. So I rang them ahead and said, "Well, can I do the Haftorah there?" It was one that I knew, and they said, "Fine," and I did it. And at the end of it, it was hushed silence. I've never seen anything like it.
Spellbound.
Well, it's a funny story. I was at shul yesterday, and my brother, he comes to join us now at the shrubberies. So the president walks over to Barry and taps him on the shoulder. So I went up to Barry. I said, "Barry," says, "What, they asked you to do Musaf or something?" He said, "No." So we hadn't laned yet. So we laned, and then all of a sudden he gets called up for Haftarah. So he doesn't have Haftarah. And then I went up to him afterwards and says, "What do you know about this one?" He said, "No." He said, "They just asked me today, could I do the Haftarah?" I went, "All right. If I have to do one, it'll take me 6 months to learn it."
I know that's very very good. My brother Jonathan can learn Haftorah himself, but that's very impressive.
Yeah,
very.
It's something that I wish I could do, but it's something that I've never got my head around really. It's just one of those. If you learn the notes and you're quite fluent with your reading, it's quite easy, straightforward. I mean, we have about 2 or 3 in our children who can do that. They can just get up on the day and just do it.
Well,
1 or 2, yeah.
If you ever wanted to learn, Alan Jacobs is your man.
Oh, I know. Well, he did have Tara class with us years ago.
I know. I came to that actually.
Yeah, but it's just a time, and you know, it's like we're busy with our lives and things and jobs. Of course. I enjoy listening to it, and that's about it.
You know what Alan would do. You know what Alan would do if ever you want to do any. He'd just record it and send it to you.
Oh yes, I know.
Any particular one. He's very good like that.
He's a legend when it comes to that. He taught my boys their laning and Haftarah.
Well, yeah, we don't do the Musaf bit in Holy Law, but we do the Maftor and Haftorah. He did our boys, yeah.
Yeah, very good. He's a legend. Very good. Right.
Right, yeah, we're going to get started. We're talking about learning. We're going to learn. We're talking about learning how to lane. We're going to learn real stuff. Just as a quick warm-up, what's going on this week on the calendar? It's Shabbos Mevarchim again, which means that next week will be Rosh Chodesh. It's actually the end of the week on Fridays, Rosh Chodesh. But because it's Mevarchim, it's a time where in this Shabbos, coming Shabbos, we'll be benching the new month. And this whole entire week becomes the week of Shabbos Mevarchim. But also in Parshah Shlach, I have a personal connection. When I had an Ofruf before we got married, so Parshah Shlach was the Parshah. It's the week before our wedding anniversary. So whenever I read Shlach, I remind myself, Shlach is about when we'll learn in a minute when Moshe sends the spies. But originally he sends them as righteous people. So the trick is that when we get sent down in life, we can take it one or two ways. We can either go north or we can go south. And the trick is that we're on a mission. That's the trick. What you're going to do with it is up to us, and you try and do the best you can. But as you enter any sort of relationship or any sort of venture in life, it's important to remind ourselves that Moshe Rabbeinu, Hashem, is sending us. And we're on a mission. What we do with it is how we go forward. So this is Parshah Shlach. The Parshah being sent. Shlach means to send. That's why the word Shliach or Shluchim, which is the word used to describe the Chabad emissaries, the Chabad Shluchim, is the word of being sent and sent out to wherever it is in order to make a difference, in order to invest and bring Yiddishkeit readily available, easily accessible to more and more Yidden, because every Yid deserves to have Yiddishkeit. Along the lines that we learned not so long ago when the Shavuos, Meirosha Kehilas Yaakov. Every Yiddish person deserves an inheritance of the Torah. What's the inheritance? You don't have to be sent on the mission. What we do with it is up to us. So that's what's going on this week's Parsha. It happens to be that this coming month, the month we're benching, the month that we're going to bless this week in Shul is the month of Tammuz, which on the Yiddish calendar for many, many years was just a month that reminded us it was beginning of the 3 weeks, Shiva Asa B'Tammuz. In recent history, in the Chabad calendar at least, it's got some highlights. It's got some highlights. There are some days of celebration, Yud Beis Tammuz and Gimel Tammuz, and also it has the date of the Rebbe's yard site in it, the 3rd of Tammuz. So it's a day where we can, we'll talk more Be'ez Hashem next week, but it's a day of warmth, of excitement, but also mission-minded. So that's what's going on the calendar this week. Let's talk what's going on in the Parshah. In the Parshah this week, the hot point we're going to focus on is the idea of reaching out to help others, and it connects to the Parshah in a number of ways. We'll focus on one. Let's do the overview of the Parshah. Starting off the Parshah we had, last week we were Moshe Rabbeinu telling Aharon after they've just inaugurated the Mishkan, they've just had the first Pesach after the giving of the Torah. So they're literally 1 year in. We've been a nation chosen by Hashem for basically a year. And it's at the stage where Hashem says to Moshe, all right, let's go into Eretz Yisrael. That's the next step. Holy land. Let's make it happen. It's about being able to change this world, materialistic world. We've got to go. No use living in a bubble in the desert. We've got to go in and engage. That's what we were born to do. Let's move into the Holy Land. And the Yiddish people say, hold it. Let's send spies. And that's the opening of this week's Parashah. Before we go into Eretz Yisrael, we ask Moshe, can we send spies? And Moshe is a bit reluctant. And Hashem says to Moshe, whatever you want. If you want to send spies, send spies. I told you guys, it's on me. And it's definitely worth it. Moshe says, yeah, but we want the people to walk in from the bottom-up approach, where the people are fully invested, fully bought in. So he chooses one spy from each shevet. And one of the reasons for that is because if there'd be a spy from a different shevet that would come back and say, oh, it's a fantastic land, we could turn around and say, oh, you guys, your family loves that kind of land. Maybe we're different. So they took one from each tribe, one from each shevet, and there was 12 of them. And the idea was for them to go in and not come back with battle plans. And the idea was they were relying on Hashem for the battle. The idea was to come back and say to the people, what sort of country is it? Is it worth fighting for or is it not? Is it that good that it's worth taking the risk? That's basically the mission they were on. They had to walk around and describe that. And they did. For 40 days and nights, they toured the land. Go ahead. I'm mute. Go ahead.
So why did God agree to Moshe? Why is he suggesting it? Why is he causing the problem? It's a no-win situation. The Philistines are tall people, whatever, aggressive people. We're only going to win, not because we're tall people, is because we have God in our background. So, and we only win when Moshe lifts his arm. So what's the whole point? Or is it's all preordained, as they say? It's all laid out. So this is the story that's already been written.
Good question.
Or is there free will there?
So the question is, why did Hashem let it happen if he knew that it could go pear-shaped? It didn't make sense that it should help. But the simple answer is that's what free will is. If the people ask for something, then free will is to let them have it, unless it's something that Hashem doesn't want to give. But Hashem says, look, it's not wrong to send in spies. And if you feel that that's what you need, then very good, go ahead and do that. I would say you don't need it, but if you feel like you need it, free will. I'm not going to stop you from sending in spies. It's not forbidden. That's on the simple level. On a slightly deeper level, actually, sending in the spies wasn't strategy. It wasn't about figuring out the best route for battle. Later on, 40 years later, Yeshua, Moshe's successor, sent in spies again, and that was reconnaissance, to be able to find out what sort of battle plans to make. And the reason for that is because they had lost the merit of blanket miracles. But in Moshe's times, they were relying on blanket miracles, just like they had when they left Mitzrayim, left Egypt. So why were they sending spies? The main mission of the spies wasn't about war plans. It was about almost like salespeople. Go in there and just tell us, what sort of land are we going to? Is it a nice place? Is it a not nice place? Is it beautiful? Is it a place that we can survive at? Is it a place that has resources? Is it the kind of business venture we want to enter into? And we don't want to go into a place, we don't want to take the risk or rely on miracles for something that's a waste of time. So more than figuring out how to battle the place, the mission was to figure out how worthy the land was. And in that sense, the spies came back and they reported that it's a great place. Their mistake was that they then took the mic and held on to it and started talking about something that they were never asked to do, figure out battle plans. And like you said, it was never supposed to be possible for them to materialistically, physically be a match. The point was to rely on miracles. But that sort of announcements that they used the mic to make did a terrible job or a very good job at doing a terrible thing and turning down the Yidden. Does that answer the question? Okay. So the story is that they bring back massive fruit and they bring back all sorts of things, but everything that they bring back, they use it to spin the story and to make it sound, although it's a fantastic place, but it's strange, and it's so strange, there's no way we can take it. So although it was supposed to be a wow factor, and it was, but they used that to spin it the other way around. And except all of the spies, except for 2, so 10 out of 12, came back saying that it's terrible and there's no way we're going to make it, except for Kalev and Yeshua. Kalev insisted that on making the announcement and letting everyone hear what he had to say. And the way he did that was, he started off by saying, oh, you think that's all the son of Amram did for us? Well, you think that's all that Moshe Rabbeinu did? And everyone's like, oh, what else is going to complain about? And as soon as they went quiet, he started laying in. Were you guys crazy? He just took it out of Egypt. We can't take us into Israel. What are you thinking? It was too late, though. The people already put on to the complaining factor, which is a great Yiddish trait, and it went downhill from there. Because right afterwards, Hashem says to Moshe, you know what? Fine, they don't want to go and they're not. They're worried that the children will be in danger. Those children that they're worried for, those children will go in, and they're the ones who won't. And for 40 years, we're going to stick it out in the desert. 40 years compared to the 40 days. And as a favor, Hashem says, you know what? The first year you've done in the desert already will count towards the 40 years. Then we only have to do another 39.
Rabbi, there's an interesting thought about this.
Go ahead.
They're in the desert there, and they're going, right, okay. And they're sort of wandering around there, and they come to a piece of land, which they want to find out about. Well, it depends how you look at it, because they don't technically have, I mean, I have to be very careful because we get into a lot of politics here, is they found a piece of land which is where they are told to go. What other choices they've got to do? There's nowhere else they're are nomads. They're sort of floating around the desert. They're doing nothing else. So they're just going to take a risk on this one. You know, what else can they do? If they do a risk assessment, if I'm using the technology of today, what we do? We stand where we are and we just sit in the tents, or we find a piece of land and we can make it work for us. You know, we'll negotiate with these. I'm trying to be political now, whatever. What else do they have the choice? If Hashem says this is where you are going, then that's it. End of story. If they're God-fearing, they would listen to what Moshe said saying what God said. If they're not God-fearing, then they'll come up with all the excuses. It's a bit like what is it now? We have to have faith, emunah. Emunah, that's the word, emunah. If you don't have faith, you don't take this emunah, then what's the point? So Moshe has to sort of say to this guy, what he did, look, we're going to do it. We're going to do it. It's what God said. That's it. End of story. Doesn't matter if there's pink trees and there's snakes and giants, whatever. We're just going to go there and Hashem will look after us. Period.
I want to say at the end of last year, they said that 2020 is in hindsight.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
You know anyone who's an optician?
Sorry?
You know anyone who's an optician?
Yeah.
When we look back and say, they should have done this and they should have done that, it's helpful to do that as long as you can say, we need to remind ourselves the lessons that they should have learned. But yes, you're absolutely right. Their option was, let's go back to Mitzrayim. They literally said to Moshe, we want to go back. Well, let's go back and do what we used to do. Because if you have to remember from the slave mentality that they were coming from, small little us mentality, they didn't know anything better, not anything better. It was very hard work for them to believe that they could succeed. It was so hard for them to think that they could ever be successful. And Hashem was encouraging them. But part of that growth is that the person starts to believe themselves. So being able to have their own person on the ground come back and tell them would encourage or should have encouraged them to be able to believe actually Hashem has fantastic things in store for us. But because that it backfired.
Yeah, Adrian, 1945.
Yes.
When the Yiddish were going through Exodus and all the rest of things, there was a group of German Jews who didn't want to leave Germany, who stayed in refugee camps in Germany, who stayed. So history repeats itself. Here we have the Promised Land in 1948, exactly the same thing was going on. We were oppressed, they were Egyptian, there was a lot more going on, and they did the same thing. They stayed in Germany in the camps. I said, we're not leaving Germany, we're staying here, even so all what went on. So wow. It's happened time and time again. History repeats itself.
Yeah. Go on, Neville.
Well, obviously they divided Berlin or into 4 quarters, and obviously they did have people in camps because nobody would still accept them anywhere. So there were probably a minority who wanted to stay there, thought they'd get the property back, but quite a few of them couldn't go anywhere because it was impossible to get where you want. And the ones that tried to go to Israel got deported back.
Yeah.
So
all the restrictions. But you know what? Judging others is we have to be really careful. But at the same time, what we should learn is that when someone comes and tells us Mashiach is coming, and we say it's impossible, no way. Look how we've got to really leave. We've got to get woken up. We've got to get woken up. We've got to realize that it's not a dream. Now is a nightmare. We think we're in reality. It seems so vivid. It seems so real. We've got it all figured out. We know what's going on. But we're dreaming. We think that this is the end all. We've got to be able to smell the coffee. But that's the story of how the spies, almost the end of the story. There was one more sadder story still, that even after Moshe Rabbeinu tells the people we're staying 40 years in the desert, there was a group of people that said to Moshe, you know what? We realized our mistake. We were wrong. Of course we're going into Israel. And Moshe said, no, it's over. We're staying here. And they're like, no, Moshe, we're going. And we're already getting ready. And they wanted to be so zealous, they started forming their own mini army. And Moshe's like, don't go. Hashem says, no, it's over. You're not going to have the protection. And unfortunately, they didn't listen. And they went up to try and fight their way into Israel. And they were destroyed by Amalek. And that was another sad part of the story when the Amalek and the Canaanites came and destroyed them. But this is, I'm just thinking now that the date of Tammuz is the date where the spies came back. We have then 2 mitzvahs thrown into the Parshah. 2 mitzvahs that are mitzvahs that will apply when the Jewish people enter into Israel. So they've just found out the news, the bad news that they're staying out into the Midbar. They're staying out in the desert. And then they find out, though, that although they're staying in the desert, they can rest assured that they will still, as a people, make it into the land. How so? Hashem says to them, when you do make it into Israel, there'll be 2 mitzvahs you have to give. And those are the menachos the meal offerings, but also the mitzvah of challah. And the name challah that we call the bread that we eat on Shabbos, called the challah, actually comes from the word challah, which is the tithing that you would take out from the dough, a small piece, take out a gift to the kohanim, and every time you make a dough, if it's large enough, there's a mitzvah there to give that gift to the kohanim, and that's how we have the mitzvah of challah. And that was given to them. That would only apply when they come into Eretz Yisrael, and they were told now that you have the mitzvah already pending when you go into Eretz Yisrael, which is similar to the situation we are in now, where we have mitzvahs that are still obligations, but we can't do it without the Beis HaMikdash, like Shachris and Mincha, Musaf, all the different offerings that were brought in the Beis HaMikdash. There are still a mitzvah for us to do, and they're pending, waiting for when the Beis HaMikdash comes back. And that's what the Yiddish people were. And then, in the end of the Parshah, we have two things. One thing is the story of the fellow who desecrated Shabbos. The Moshe says he went out gathering sticks. And then the other thing is the mitzvah of tzitzis, which we read as part of the third part of Shema, which is in this week's Parshah, the mitzvah to have on every four-cornered garment that a person wears, that a man wears, that is. It has to have strings, tassels on them, and that's tzitzis. And they also have the blue string, which it can't be any blue, but it has to be a very specific techeles. And the idea of tzitzis is to remind us, in order to remember the mitzvahs that Hashem gave to us. Interesting that today we tend to wear tzitzis or a talis every day. Strictly speaking, the mitzvah minat Torah, the biblical mitzvah is only if you happen to have a four-cornered garment. Midrabanan, the Rabbanan came and said, we want to make sure that you always have a four-cornered garment so that you always have tzitzis. What happens if a person has a pair of tzitzis and the strings snapped off? So then it's obviously much better to not wear the four-cornered garment without tzitzis than to wear the tzitzis that has 3 out of 4. Why is it much better? Because wearing the four-cornered garment is an added bonus that you should make sure you put yourself in a situation where you need to have the tassels, the strings on the corners. But if the strings aren't there, then better don't wear it, because if you are wearing it, then the Torah says you must have tassels, and if you don't, you shouldn't be wearing it. So that's the idea of tzitzis, and of course it's a tremendous amount of protection, and it's a reminder of doing mitzvahs. And the David HaMelech mentions about it, how he always, wherever he walked around and he had his tzitzis on, he felt like he had some sort of connection point to Hashem. Okay, so that's the parasha in a nutshell. I think we did a good overview. We're going to go and jump into one particular area of the parasha. And the way we're going to phrase it is, we're going to start off with the mitzvah of tzedakah. Tzedakah is a big Yiddish mitzvah. Yiddish people like to give tzedakah. It's part of our DNA. It's how Hashem describes us. There are 3 things that the Chacham say are traits that define the Yiddish people: Rachmanim, Baishanim, and Goyim Chasadim. Merciful, bashful, and Goyim Chasadim would like to do kindness. Part of our DNA. In other words, if we're caught giving charity, we should know that it's part of how we were born to do. But when I give away money that was mine and I give it to someone else, I've taken away something from me for the sake of someone else having that money, or that goodness, whatever the kindness is. And that's a mitzvah of tzedakah. Here's the question. What happens if we're not talking about money? And we're not talking about material goodness. Let's talk about Yiddishkeit. Can I take away some of my Yiddishkeit for the sake of somebody else having some Yiddishkeit? What I mean to say is it okay? Sorry, please keep me a tissue. Is it okay to give away and to do less mitzvahs in the order that someone else should have the opportunity? Someone else should have the opportunity to do something right. Thank you. Let's just say it's a question of either myself or somebody else. And am I allowed to do a little less for the sake of someone else having the opportunity to do a mitzvah? Sacrificing religious values for the sake of someone else being able to do it. Anyone have any thoughts or suggestions on that? Is that considered tzedakah? Is it praiseworthy? Is it even allowed? Is it commendable? Is it not commendable?
I suppose if a religious person is giving away mitzvahs, it's commendable and good direction, because the religious person can always do some of those mitzvahs another day. Okay. If he wants to. As long as it's something that, if he forgoes, he can always do them another time, because that's his his merit and in his psychology that that's what he wants to do. If the other person, it isn't in their psychology to do, then it's better to give them the mitzvahs to do when they're available and agreeable to it, and then it's a win-win, isn't it?
Good angle.
It's interesting, I've just seen, if you just look at the headline, you put here, sacrificing religious adherence to help someone, right? Okay.
Admirable. Go ahead.
So you're sacrificing something of a mitzvah. Are you saying that? Before I get asked the second thing, because how we give in charity form can vary from person to person. DNA is an interesting word. I would be very careful that not every. I mean, I'm not labeling myself, but there is people I know that don't give it in physical terms, in tzedakah and stuff like that. They give it in different ways. I'll tell you a story. Many years ago, I put up a sukkah in our house in our garden on Edgecroft Road West. And this guy, who's a neighbour of mine, a Yiddish fella. No, he wasn't a neighbour at the time. He's now a neighbour. He's a Yiddish fella. Keeps absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. He has no. I think he just about went to shul to say Kaddish for his parents. But when I came to build the sukkah, he had his roof done. I had this lot of spare wood. And he said, look, Jeff, I've got all this wood. You can have it for your sukkah. Now, he actually did a massive mitzvah. And I can take you closer to home, but I can't for various reasons. When mitzvahs are done, not through Yiddishkeit, not through giving tzedakah, but very, very indirectly, helping somebody in their health, saving somebody's life. And this is something I am very strong about. The fact that we are around the table today and we're all doing the traditional stuff but it doesn't mean to say that, you keep all the mitzvahs, that you can give it. There's a lot of charitable people out there who keep nothing in hourly, but they give to a lot of charities, a lot of very well-to-do businessmen who give money that we would dream about. I read an article recently, I don't know why. There was an interesting article in the paper about giving to this church to do with the COVID. And they raised £2.5 million. And there's one Yiddish fellow there, he's given 100 grand. He's well known in London, a Yiddish businessman. 100 grand.
Baruch Hashem, for good thing.
So it's a very interesting thing is how people give in different ways.
Yeah. I'm going to say that the word mitzvah means following an instruction from Hashem. That's why I'm connecting the word mitzvah to religious adherence. Now, we tend to use the word mitzvah as good deed, which is not incorrect, but it's not really the definition of a mitzvah. Mitzvah means to follow an instruction of Hashem. So when I'm saying, I'm going to go back to what Neville was saying, if somebody is doing lots of mitzvahs, lots of things that Hashem said, lots of religious adherences, and he's going to forgo one. I'll do more later. But this one, I'm just going to tweak up the question a bit. I won't get back. I'm not going to get a chance to do it again. I'll maybe do it a different time, but this time is gone. Let's say I'm going to miss out on davening with a minion. Let's just say, or I might even miss davening. But because if I don't miss davening, so-and-so is not going to have a chance to keep Shabbos. Should I not daven in order to quickly go and help someone else keep Shabbos? I mean, hold on a second. So-and-so should make their own arrangements for Shabbos, and I can't help them because I'm bound by my own religious adherences. I can't not daven. So that's really the question. Is it commendable to forgo some of my own religious adherence for the sake of someone else being able to do something which is important even more?
It happens all the time. Hatzalah do it all the time.
I would say that Hatzalah are keeping Shabbos by breaking it.
They go out in the car. I was nearly in tears a few years ago when I used to run the CST security at our shul. Somebody took bad on Rosh Hashanah, or was it Yom Kippur? And to see a guy in a kettle get out of a car on Yom Kippur, a front guy, to go and help somebody's life, was an experience which I'll never, ever, ever forget. It was unbelievable. He was in a white kettle. He got out of a taxi there to come into our shul to help somebody who had become ill.
Yeah.
So there it is. There's no more. You can't answer any more than that.
It's a great example, even though it's not necessarily an example we should borrow, because the law of Shabbos is that you have to break Shabbos in order to save someone's life. When someone's life is on the line, then that's the most important mitzvah. So all other mitzvahs are not even available. But we're talking about not someone's life. We're not talking about someone's money. We're talking about someone's religious observance. So if they came out of a tax and a kittel to help someone keep Yom Kippur, not because they were in danger, but because they want to teach someone how to fast on Yom Kippur. Should I break Yom Kippur in order to teach someone else how to keep Yom Kippur? That wouldn't make sense. But let's see something else, something more minor than that, in order to help someone do something major. And that's the question that very often you'll have people who are in an insular environment or community, and they say, we don't want to talk to anybody. We don't want to engage with anybody outside of our bubble. We're not naming anyone or pointing fingers, but in order to protect our religious adherences, we don't want to have anything to do with anybody who doesn't fit a certain standard, because we don't want to be influenced. Even though it's true that we might be able to encourage more people and make it more available for others to be able to do mitzvahs, but that's their problem. Let them figure out themselves whether or not they want to be involved in doing a mitzvah or doing something religious or something good. But for us, we want to just look at our own selves, at our own community, and adhere and keep the walls of the community up and high. And here we're looking at this week's Parshah, and we're going to explore how actually in this week's Parshah, an interesting observation, it's not directly in the Parshah, but it's brought down in the Rashi in the Parshah that teaches us that it's so important to realize that religious observance adherences are not mechanical checkboxes. It can't be tick box. You've done it. You can say you kept Yom Kippur or you didn't go in a car, tick. No, there's a reason why we keep Yom Kippur. And the reason why we keep Yom Kippur is because it helps us do what Hashem wants us to do. And therefore, if Hashem wants us to get in the car, that's what we have to do. Even though it feels very uncomfortable, even though people will give us looks. And maybe it's not saving a life. Maybe it's something else. Maybe it's education. But this is what Hashem wants us to do, to be able to put ourselves aside in order to help somebody else, not only when it comes to finances or saving someone's life or whatever else it might be, but also when it comes to helping someone else in their religious adherences as well. That's extremely important. It happens to be that as Jewish people, we need that. We need to be encouraged and we need to be able to encourage others. That's what we're going to explore from this week's Parsha. I think we can find some great examples of how this plays itself out. But first, let's do a few psukim and see an insight. So the opening of the Parsha is that Hashem sends the spies, which he described. And then we have the story of how the spies came back and gave the bad story. However, they send up in the last paragraph, the people who inhabit the land are mighty, and the cities are extremely huge and fortified. And there we saw even the offsprings of the giants. And that, of course, was supposed to be a fear factor that would scare the people into saying, we're not going to go in. That wasn't enough. So then they further scared the people by mentioning the scary name. What was the scary fear factor? Amalek. Amalek had picked a fight with the Jewish people when nobody was expecting anything. They traveled miles and miles to come and pick a fight with the Jewish people. And it had to be a very difficult war for the Jewish people who had just literally become a free nation. They were more or less slaves, just about emancipated, and all of a sudden they're fighting a battle, and that's what was supposed to scare them. That was the story. Interestingly, this picture here on the screen is supposed to describe what Hashem had done for the people and how it had been turned around. This is supposed to be a fruit that was oversized. These reputable men, these men who were supposed to be special people, took every goodness that Hashem had given them and turned it around to make it look like it's a negative downer. It makes the people more scared. It's a fear reactor. They started turning around saying that the massive fruits that we brought back are just an example of how dangerous and difficult the country, the landscape is. But here's the point I wanted to bring out. Rashi. No, not this Rashi, the next one. Here, this one here. Says Rashi, send for yourself men. Why is this section dealing with the spies juxtaposed? It's put right next to the section dealing with Miriam. Anyone remember the story of Miriam? Miriam was the sister of Aaron and Moshe. And the end of last week's Parsha, Aaron and Miriam, Moshe's brother and sister, were talking. And they started talking about Moshe. And they were saying, how come Moshe doesn't go home to his wife anymore? He stays out. He stays out the tent. Doesn't even go home. And in a flash, story continues. Hashem calls Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam. Miriam gets covered in saras. She spoke lashon hara. And she spoke about her brother. And the end of last week's Parshah is that Miriam, the great righteous woman, who was the leader of the Jewish women at the time, she was the sister of Moshe. She was the one who led the women in praise and song. All of a sudden got punished. And everyone could see that she'd been punished. She had to stay outside the camp. But in reward for her righteousness and her merits, the people waited for her and didn't travel until she got better. It was a whole week and everyone waited for her. But you could imagine it was very uncomfortable for her, but also it was extremely embarrassing for her. And that was part of the learning curve of not to talk about people. So here Rashi's asking, that was the end of last week's Parsha. How does this week's Parsha's opening connect and follow on from the story of Miriam getting Taras? Says Rashi, there's a reason. There's a lesson, there's a message in one story following on from the other story. The Miriam story, getting Taras for speaking Lashon Hara, follows straight into this week's Parsha, where the spies go and bring back a bad report. Because she was punished over matters of slander for speaking against her brother, and these wicked people witnessed it, but did not learn their lesson. This is the connection between these two stories. There's a lesson in the story's order. The order of her, we learn the Parashah. The truth is that Moshe Rabbeinu would have written down the Torah piece by piece, and just before he sent the spies, he would have taught to all the people that Miriam's story of Taras is now going to become written Torah. And he wrote it down as it played itself out, at least according to some opinions in the Torah. So now what we have is that Miriam's story of getting Taras was taught and recorded right before the story of the spies, with the intention of teaching the spies what not to do. And they didn't learn the lesson. Instead, they continued to do exactly the same thing. What did the spies slander? What was the terrible plague of this, the punishment of the mistake of the spies? They used their mouths to talk down and talk bad about the land that God had promised. And clearly, that created an enormous problem. It created so much fear that the people didn't want to hear anymore, didn't want to go in. So they should have learned from Miriam, and they didn't. And that's why Miriam's story is placed directly in front of the story of the spies. And that is how Rashi explains the connection. It's interesting. What it teaches us is that the order the Torah is recorded can also teach us lessons, not just the wording. And here is where we start the observations. Once we understand that Rashi, quoting from Chazal, is telling us that the Miriam story is connected to the spies' mistake story, this is where we start asking questions. And we ask ourselves, hold on, Miriam compared to the spies? Miriam was a righteous person. She barely did anything wrong in her life. The one thing she did was she mentioned to her brother about the other brother, and she got punished top-notch for it. Can we really say that she's the same as the spies and the spies are the same as her? These spies were terrible. These are the spies that had gone out and done all sorts of terrible things. How can we really say that Miriam and the spies are the same? And that's the question that we ask in this observation. Let's just read it inside. We're going to read these two readings, one after the other. Story of the Miriam, the story of the spies, both of which are about Lashon Hara. One could possibly make the terrible mistake of thinking that Miriam and the spies can be placed in the same category, God forbid. Or at least that the two stories are similar to one another. Seemingly, to avoid such a misunderstanding and to make clear that the spies were not on Miriam's spiritual level at all, the Torah ought to have placed these two stories apart from one another and placed some other passage in between them. But instead, the Torah doesn't. It connects it, almost implying that these two stories are teaching us how bad Miriam was, or how the spies are just like Miriam. And of course, the question we're asking is, how is that fair for Miriam? How is it fair to take one of the most righteous women in Jewish history and put her in the same terrible light of the people who had destroyed an entire generation's opportunity to go into Israel, questioned God's ability to bring them into the Holy Land? They themselves got punished with death for it because they had taken the Jews on such a far ride. How can we say and suggest that Miriam is similar? And it happens to be that there's a halachic concept of looking like you're doing the right thing, even if you don't mind what people think of you, it's important for Yisim Nikiyim. How come the Torah suggests that her minor sin is so bad? Go ahead, Neville.
Because she was perceived to be of a higher level, and therefore more was expected of her.
Absolutely. More is definitely expected from her. But at the same time, we run the risk of making her look like not only was more expected from her, her sin is as bad as. That's something else. To suggest that she's as terrible as the spies when she's really not. Only more is expected when she's held to a higher standard. But you can't suggest that she's acting the same. And this becomes the question. Clearly, the Torah has something to teach us by pointing out the connection between these two sins. Almost like highlighting how severe her sin was, implying that it was really, really terrible, teaches us something. It teaches us not only that the spies should have learned from her, but it teaches us more in another lesson. And the answer is going to be, it's teaching us that it's almost like we're going to forgo the spiritual level of Miriam and allow ourselves to be seen as a lower spiritual standard in order to try and safeguard the generation that was about to make a mistake. So Moshe Rabbeinu would have recorded and taught this story of Miriam and taught it to the people about to send in spies, even though that was going to play itself out and make it look like Miriam's a bad person. But that was worthwhile. It was a spiritual or a religious sacrifice, so to speak, in order to try and safeguard the spies from making the mistake that they could. Even though it didn't work out, it's still taught to us this way because it teaches us how much Miriam was willing to forego, or how much the Torah is willing to sacrifice on Miriam's behalf in order to teach somebody else and try and help them avoid a sin. Let's just put it inside, because in general, this question is asked in the Talmud. We're going to go back to the question we started off with is it okay to sacrifice my own religious adherence for the sake of someone else? Two stories. First story is a story of Shabbos. It's in the Mishnah. And the Talmud Tractate Shabbos discusses, are you allowed to bake on Shabbos? The answer is no. Are you allowed to start a fire on Shabbos? Also, the answer is no. What happens if the fire was already burning, but I put something into the oven on Shabbos? That's also forbidden. It's not a problem of creating a fire, but it is a problem of baking in that fire. And therefore, it's also forbidden. What happens if I put something in the oven and I take it out before it bakes? It was going to bake, and I shouldn't have done it. And when I realized my mistake, I realized it's Shabbos, I quickly take it out the oven. In that case, I should never have done it, but I haven't actually committed a crime because I've saved myself from the crime taking place. So on Shabbos afternoon, I see the oven's on, I put a piece of dough, whatever's into the oven, and then before it bakes, I quickly take it out. That's not transgression because I've saved the dough from getting baked. I've saved myself from committing the crime of baking on Shabbos. Now here's the question. There's an additional thing. Today, if you want to bake a bread, you just put it into the oven on a tray, on the rack, and it bakes. In the good old days, I think you can even find these type of ovens in some places today. They wouldn't put it inside an oven that was a box. It would be a fire inside a kind of a dome, and you would stick the dough onto the wall of the dome, the bricks of the dome, and that would bake. And then when it was time for the bread to come out, there would be a special art of being able to shovel off the dough from the wall of the oven in a way that it doesn't fall into the fire, but it doesn't break. And then you take it out and you have that bread. That's not really forbidden in itself. But the Chachamim, Midrabanan, rabbinically speaking, they forbade any sort of shoveling off the dough off the wall because they consider it an art. And we're worried that a person might leave the challah in before Shabbos, come to shovel it off on Shabbos, and before you know it, they're starting to leave it in on Shabbos. It's way too close. And therefore, rabbinically speaking, it's forbidden to shovel off the dough. Here comes the question of the Mishnah. What happens if I put the dough in the oven? It was on Shabbos. And then I realized, I need to take the dough out because it's Shabbos. And if I leave it, it's going to bake. Should I or should I not shovel the dough off the wall? Shoveling the dough off the wall is forbidden rabbinically. Leaving it in is forbidden from the real mitzvah, from the Torah. So should I better break the Derabanan, the rabbinical mitzvah, and save myself from the real sin of baking on Shabbos? Or should I better not do anything and then end up transgressing Shabbos? So of course the answer is better break a small Derabanan in this particular case in order to save yourself from doing the real sin. But I myself should save myself from a bigger sin. What happens if it's not me? Let's say it's my brother or a friend who doesn't really know about Shabbos or doesn't care about Shabbos. And they've put the dough into the oven and they've gone to have some coffee or they've gone away. And now I realize that if that dough stays in, he's going to break Shabbos. But if I break Shabbos a little bit, a rabbinical prohibition, and shovel the dough off, I'll save my brother or my friend from breaking a real serious Shabbos problem. Should I sacrifice my religious adherence a little bit to save my brother from a real serious problem, breaking Shabbos? Should I or should I not take the steps, the responsibility, the severity of breaking the Shabbos a little bit, at least rabbinically, in order to save somebody else from breaking Shabbos fully? So Rav Shela said that they permitted someone else to remove the bread to save the individual from transgression. Rav Shesha strongly objected to this. He would tell a person, sin so that another will benefit. Rather, as Rabbi Abaya said, if one stuck bread to the oven, the rabbis permitted him, but not someone else, to remove it. Thus, avoiding a more serious transgression that would incur the death penalty, he can save himself. But for me, to break even a little bit of Shabbos and sin, at least rabbinically, for the sake of helping somebody else, is not allowed. Verboten. Out of these two opinions, which one would you agree with? John Neville? Would you say better not or better yes? Should I break Shabbos a little bit in order to save someone else from breaking Shabbos fully, or not? Because the person is allowed to do that for himself.
It's very difficult because your influence on people will not be fundamental. It'll be progressive and on a drip theory. Yeah, there's no magic wand scenario. It takes a very long time, and people are only going to do what they want to do when they see it or when they get it. Yeah.
100%. So it doesn't have long-term benefit in a sense. But here, let's just say, you know what? Let's just to make the question more specific. Imagine with someone who generally keeps Shabbos, but they made a mistake, or they forgot it was Shabbos, or they said today I don't care. But now that they're gone, they're not planning on breaking Shabbos again. Well, the other way to look at it is, let's just look at today. Let's not look at long term. But I think you make a good point. You make a good point that at the end of the day, saving Shabbos, will that really help? The halacha, though, there's two opinions here. As always, there's a machlokes and multiple opinions. So Rav Shela says you can, Rav Shesha says you can't. But here's a different story. And the second story is a different one. The second story is about somebody who's going to tithe their produce that they're selling in order to make sure that it's kosher to eat. When you buy food from Eretz Yisrael, if you buy Israeli-made food, any sort of fruit or vegetable, peppers, avocados, oranges, if they come from Israel, then they have to be tithed. What does tithe mean? There's a special procedure in which you take some away. In the times of Eretz Yisrael, in Israel, you would have the same thing when the Beis Hamikdash was around. You could not buy fruit and vegetable from a farmer unless you took tithe yourself, with one exception. When there was somebody who was known to be the Rav, or someone who was known to be a Chaver, someone who was very meticulous about it, if you ever buy something from their produce, then it's considered that you can be sure that it's already tithed. That's the rule. Now, the interesting thing is, though, that you cannot tithe fruit from one field for another field. You have to take the produce tithing from its same produce, at least in the first instance. When you walk into a field where the rabbi is selling you some fruit from his own tree, so then you can be sure that he's tithed it already. What happens if you're not buying it from the rabbi, though? You're buying it from somebody else who helped out the rabbi, and the rabbi's out of town. Can you assume that the rabbi's taken the maaser, the tithing that needs to be taken from the fruit, even though he's not there. And the rule is that we say that the rabbis will likely have taken tithes wherever they are from different fruits in order to make sure that whoever's buying from their field, from their shop, doesn't run into the issue of having food, assuming it's tithed when it's not. That's the halacha. Now, because we say that really you shouldn't be taking maaser from a different tree or from a different place, turns out that the rabbis are doing a little transgression. They're taking from the wrong place in order to protect others from making a serious transgression, assuming that they're eating something that's tithed when really it's not. Here's the Talmud in Eruvin. Rebbe reasoned it is preferable for the chaver, the rabbi, to commit a minor offense, i.e. separating tithes in the wrong fashion, so that another person not unwittingly commit a graver offense, eating untithed produce. And here we say that it's not only okay, it's commendable for them to take a minor transgression, even though it means that they're not doing exactly the way they should be. And that's a religious adherence sacrifice. But for the sake of safeguarding somebody else, it's very important, it's very good. So here you have two examples. One is the dough in the oven, in which we say it's arguable whether you should or you shouldn't. But the unconventional tithing, then we say you should break the rules a little bit in order to make someone else safe from doing something worse. So on the one hand, you can't remove the dew from someone else, but if you can save someone else, what's the difference? So there's two ways to explain it. One way to explain it is that you cannot safeguard someone from doing something that they want to do. Very similar to what you were saying before, Neville, is that if somebody's interested in breaking Shabbos, they put the dough in there. Don't break Shabbos to help them, because they're not interested in your help, and it's not going to help them. It was their free choice or their bad choice to do it, and that's their choice. But in the case of tithing, someone's going to buy fruit from the rabbi. They don't intend to break the rules. They're relying on you. And in that case, the fact that they haven't done anything wrong, it's not their fault. Therefore, you can help them, even if it costs a little bit of a religious sacrifice. That's one way of explaining it. But there's another way of explaining it. And the Rashi seems to be learning the other way. And that is, it's not so much about whether they want to or don't want to. What are you going to save them from? By breaking the rules. In the case of the dough, you'll save them not from the act of baking, because the act of baking is putting dough in the oven. The rest of it, the oven does itself. That act was done already. You're going to save them from the consequences of that act. You're going to save them from the punishment of the act, but the act was done by them. And saving someone from consequences, from punishments, isn't enough of a reason to break the rules. Whereas in the first case, the act that's forbidden is eating a fruit, and that act hasn't happened yet. You're saving them from doing the act of the forbidden act, and that you should try and help someone remove that sort of danger, even though it costs me a little bit of religious sacrifice, so to speak. So applying that rule, saving someone from the act of religious or act of a forbidden act is worthy of even a little bit of breaking my own halacha. If that's the case, then we can understand that why Miriam's reputation was worth sacrificing, thrown under the bus, so to speak, in this hope that it would at least try to save the act of Lashon Hara that was about to ruin an entire generation, and unfortunately did, by Miriam putting her name on the line. That's really the juxtaposition that we have over here. We have, where are we going here? If we differentiate between one who acted negligent and one who didn't, we can conclude as follows. In this case, she was not negligent, therefore it is permissible to divide the Shabbat. Wrong way. Where are we looking for here? Let's just do it on the screen. It's determined by the person being saved, having not acted negligently. Wrong thing. There we go. This explains how the Torah, by juxtaposition the possession, could put Miriam's position where one might suspect that her deeds were somehow comparable to those of the spies. The spies ought to have taken heed from the story and taken care not to commit the sin to begin with his choice. And this is why Rashi says, he puts it into the wording, learning the lesson. The point of sharing the lesson was to save someone else from sinning and to steer them in the right direction. And Miriam's religious title or religious connection was being put on the line in order to teach us this. What does that tell us? It tells us an important lesson for ourselves. The life lesson that we're learning here is not only when it comes to mitzvahs that people are comfortable with. When somebody else is going to be able to grow in their Yiddishkeit, then even though it means that for myself, I'm going to have to suspend some of my own particular connections, then it's so important to be able to do that. A classic example of this is the Pesach Seder night. At Seder night, very often it's family time. And at family time, different people come from different backgrounds or are used to different things. And often we think to ourselves, how can I forego the tradition that I have, that we spend 15 hours asking questions and doing this, that, and the other, just because somebody else is going to be more comfortable at the Seder? Nah, my religious connection is so important. My religious adherences are so real. And sometimes we have to realize that it's not wrong to have those adherences. It's very commendable. But for the sake of someone else being able to join in a Seder and do a mitzvah that they otherwise wouldn't do, then I have to go back to the drawing table and ask myself the real question. And what's important, though, is to not forego taking the direction and the clarity from making sure that the mitzvahs are the forefront. But in this week's parashah, we learn that if somebody else can be encouraged and can develop a connection to Hashem, even at the cost of my own religious extra adherences, then that comes first. Why does that come first? Just like we can understand that giving charity, having someone else benefit, comes before my own comforts, the same thing is true when bringing closeness to Hashem. Because the truth of the matter is, the reason why we give charity is because we're all connected. Helping someone else is really helping myself. And the same goes for religious adherences as well. Doing a mitzvah isn't about ticking a box. Doing a mitzvah is about connecting to Hashem. And as a people, as human beings, but specifically as Jewish people, we are all interconnected. And interconnected means that when I help someone else step up, we've helped everybody together. The Abish should bench us that we learned something, and that something is, we've spoken about it in terms that are easy for us to hear, but the same lesson applies even when it's a difficult situation. And it's not so easy for us to forego our own connection when it's the right thing to do. We must remind ourselves that not only is it okay, but it's the commendable and it's the right thing, meaning it's the thing we should be doing, not just we could be doing. Should be a blessed week, should be a week full of goodness, a week full of happiness, and it should only be bigger and better good news on all fronts. Thank you very much for joining, everybody. Thank you, Neva. Have a wonderful week. Thank you, Stephen. And Be'ez Hashem next week, all being well.